In 2018, Gibraltar's Chief Minister Fabian Picardo warned the population to brace themselves for a period of peaks and troughs before the Brexit withdrawal agreement between the UK and the EU was finalised. A year later, he referred to the political climate as a roller coaster that we're all riding on without knowing what awaits us in the future, because we are not fortune tellers. Well, here we are when I'm filming this in April 2024, and that roller coaster has never stopped, for Gibraltar at least. There was a general euphoria and an almost tangible sense of relief on December 31st in 2020 when Picardo announced that his government had reached an in-principle agreement with the UK and Spain, a proposed framework for a treaty on Gibraltar's future relationship with the EU. Under the terms of this agreement, the land border, which threatened to become so problematic as a result of Brexit, would disappear, and the external Schengen border would be moved to Gibraltar Airport and Port, staffed by officers from the EU Frontex force rather than Spain. This would create an area of mutual prosperity for Gibraltar and the nearest area of Spain, called the Campo de Gibraltar. We want to see greater prosperity become a material reality for the whole of Gibraltar and the whole of the region around us. The arrival at the end of the Brexit storm of a rainbow of opportunities, as the Chief Minister's statements put it. So the question on everyone's lips now is, where is it? Where's this treaty, the area of mutual prosperity, the abolition of the land border? Wasn't it only supposed to take 6 months to complete? And why are they taking so long? Well, excitement mounted recently with news that a top-level treaty meeting would take place in Brussels on April 12th between Fabian Picardo, UK Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron, his Spanish counterpart José Manuel Albares, and EU Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič, who is responsible for relations with the UK. But was this finally it? Were the seemingly endless talks finally over? No, was the disappointing reply. The meeting had been positive and constructive. There had been progress, but there was still some work to do. Tantalizingly, the joint statement issued afterwards referred to agreement having been reached on general policy lines, including the airports, goods and mobility, all of which had been widely believed to have been major sticking points. But no details were given, and that was deliberate. In an interview with the TV channel GBC News, Picardo explained that everything he is reading in the press about these negotiations is contrary to the reality of what's going on and a speculation on the part of journalism. It would not be helpful at this very late stage to move the negotiation into the media, he said. Whilst understanding that people want to know what is happening, this would not be a useful way of getting this to the destination we all want, which is a secure and safe treaty, he said. Following that latest meeting, numerous journalists have been proclaiming that it's about time a deal is done, that it has all taken too long and those involved should pull their fingers out, because they should stop doing that and instead reflect on the sheer magnitude of this agreement, if indeed there is one, because it could all still fall apart even now. There is nothing simple about this proposed treaty, just as there was nothing simple about Brexit. It's not a case of just moving a border from one place to another. Far more is involved and too much is at stake to rush a conclusion. And dots have to be placed on I's, crosses put on T's, and everybody's interest has to be safeguarded and protected. Everyone's red lines must remain firmly intact. Every possible consequence has to be considered by all sides. Early in the Brexit negotiations, Picardo said there was concern that they could wake up the day after it happened and realize there were things nobody had realized or thought of because this was a unique situation. Well, it is. If this treaty is agreed, it will be historic for Gibraltar, for Spain, for the EU, for the UK. But Picardo has also warned that there are bound to be things in it which people won't like, because that's the nature of such negotiations. Also, the arrangements would be for 4 years and would then be subject to review. And that could be quite another headache. So yes, the wait has been agonizing and the lack of information frustrating. And the roller coaster is still hurtling us upwards and plunging us downwards. But there's nothing any of us can do to stop it. It is said that patience is a virtue. It may be wearing thin after all this time, but for the sake of Gibraltar and the nearby Campo area, they are all going to have to be virtuous for a bit longer. Top political scientist John Curtis predicted another referendum on Britain's membership of the EU could take place in the next 16 years anyway. I think the 2016 referendum is going to be as unsuccessful as the 1975 one, is what Curtis told the UK in a Changing Europe research organisation last week in reference to the vote that took Britain into the then European communities in the first place. The timescale of another referendum depends very much on uncertain politics, he said. But he says I wouldn't be surprised if it happens before 2040. Curtis, he's professor of politics at the University of Strathclyde and a well-respected pollster in Westminster, argued that another referendum could not be ruled out because of the way different age groups voted back in 2016. If you look so far at what's happened to attitudes, if you look at the age profile of attitudes towards Brexit, you can see why, he said. Ipsos polling showed 75% of 18 to 24-year-olds would voted Remain, with 25 for Leave, compared to 34% of 65 to 74-year-olds. The attitude of an incoming Labour government, and which is highly likely to win the next election, towards the EU will also be pivotal. That's what Curtis argued. And he asks, how does our relationship with the EU evolve? To what extent does the next Labour government soften it or not, is what he's asking. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy has repeatedly said the EU will be Labour's number one priority in rebuilding relationships with international allies. But the party has ruled out trying to rejoin the Union or its single market or the customs union. But Curtis said, one of the things to realize is the Labour Party is going to get elected by an electorate which is 3/4 anti-Brexit. Labour's vote is almost as anti-Brexit as it was back in 2019. After the privatization of the British Railways in the 1990s, train tickets became more expensive and services worse. And Labour, which we are talking about, also knows now how to do it better for this election. The British Railway was largely privatised in the 1990s, and now the opposition Labour Party in Great Britain has announced that it will nationalise the country's rail network again if it takes over government. We will create the Great British Railway, said Labour Transport spokeswoman Louise Haigh. There is a need for a central office that controls our railways in the interest of the passengers. The British Railway was privatised in the 1990s by the then Conservative government under Prime Minister John Major. The operation of many sections of the route was subsequently taken over by private companies, many of which ran into difficulties due to poor performance and high operating costs. And in recent years, some routes have come back under state control. In recent years, the sector has also been affected by numerous strikes and trains are regularly cancelled. The prices for tickets are also considered high. And the current Conservative government has defended privatization and has proposed creating a new public body responsible for awarding contracts to rail companies. The Labour Party announcement is one of its currently very few concrete election promises. In the polls, Labour is far ahead of the governing Tories, and the British rail network is the oldest in the world. But that is just one piece where we hear something now. About the EU, we only have heard that they will not try to rejoin or to go into the customs union or the single market, but not much more in detail. That's why I mentioned that earlier, what Curtis said about the voters' intention of Labour. and their stance on the EU. But we are closing in on this election. It will happen this year, most probably. That it has to happen until January. And so a little bit more of details could be quite necessary, especially in what they are planning in the relationship with the EU. We all know why they don't want to talk about this, because they are afraid they're losing voters by talking about it at all. But they will need a plan. If you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.